Hello and welcome to Restoration DIY. It's great to have you here and I hope you enjoy the video. In this week's episode, I'll be doing a project which develops as it goes along. At the start I had a very clear idea of what I wanted, but the end result was something very different. So without further ado, let's get into it. So my original idea was to cast a section of yew in epoxy resin and have that as a featured midsection in a tall vase. So after cutting the timber to length, I then had to strip all the loose bark off it. This was fairly easy to do, and once this was mostly removed, I used a brass wire wheel to scuff the surface and remove the mildew. I waxed the bucket and placed the yew in the centre, and then it was ready for casting. The chosen colours for this project were cyan, magenta, yellow and black, or as close as I had. This combination is more commonly known as CMYK, the basic colours an inkjet printer uses. The first three letters, CMY, match their respective colour, and the K, well, that stands for key, which is the black. And this brings me to this episode's sponsor, T-Expert. They offer a range of epoxy resin products. The one I'm using is a crystal clear resin mixed at a 1:1 ratio. You'll find a link to their website and a 10% discount code in the video description. I added a heavy dose of colourant to each batch and then thoroughly mixed each one for around 2 minutes. Once all 4 batches were mixed, I left them to pre-cure. I primed the surface of the yew with some of the black coloured batch. I did this to hopefully prevent voids forming in the resin. I didn't want a repeat of one of my earlier projects, which required a lot of repairs. I used packing tape to hold the wood in place. Then checked on the resin temp. Not sure if you can see, but it's still around 18 degrees Celsius, so I got on with some other stuff. And I very nearly lost the black batch of resin. This heated up very quickly, but once in the bucket and disaster averted, I waited a while longer, and when the others were ready, I poured them in as well. Then this went into the pressure pot and left to cure. In my haste to get the casting done, I'd made a mistake. I'd used the wrong size bucket. I'd meant to use a smaller one. The resin only half filled the casting, so 6 hours later, I returned to top it up. I knew that adding the second layer of resin would create a witness line, but I was too far in to abandon the project. What I thought to do was keep the matching colours on top of each other, thereby reducing the contrast. Then I thought, there will be a line, so why not enhance it? So I added a layer of black resin before adding the colours, to make it stand out. This was placed back in the pressure pot and left to cure for 24 hours. It's the next day, the resin has cured, and with the casting free of the bucket, all was well. There were no voids or cracks, and you can clearly see a dark witness line between the 2 layers. So with no time to waste, I fixed it to the lathe. While securing the blank to the lathe, I began to rethink how this project would turn out. The blank was much bigger than I'd intended, and I would have to remove a lot of resin to fully expose the yew. So with that in mind, I wound the lathe speed up to around 850 RPM and began removing the outer layers. So as I get started shaping the outer surface, I have to say that this project had a lot of work on the lathe. In all, there were over 6 hours of recorded video. So as I go along at certain points, I'll be skipping ahead. I'll let you know when I do. just enough waste removed to balance the blank, I moved on to forming a tenon so I could better mount the workpiece on the lathe. For this, I used the mid-sized carbide to rough it out, then the gouge to level the top and finesse the shape. Tenon done, I turned the blank around, fixed it between the four-jaw chuck and the tailstock, and then I set about levelling the base. Formed a slightly concave shape to the underside so the finished piece will sit nicely on its outer edge, and then I moved on to cutting the mortise. And this is where I decided it wouldn't be a tall vase. I wanted to keep as much of the resin outer surface as I could. I thought about forming a pedestal, but I wasn't confident the central core of U would be strong enough to stand the turning process. So I settled on this being a large hollow form with a U rim, or at least that's what I was planning to do. Mortise done, I added some embellishment to the recess, sanded to 800 grit, and added a finish. Now the base was finished, hopefully for the last time, I could turn the blank around and shape the outer surface. Having it this way around also gave me access to the rim and for hollowing out. Using the mid-sized carbide, I removed the shiny outer layer, but this was a bit aggressive and created a lot of chipping in the midsection, so I switched to a negative rate carbide, but this was struggling to make a cut, so out came a freshly sharpened 3/8 bowl gouge. I've been having a lot of success with this lately. It's not the fastest cutting tool, but it will take a reasonable thickness with each pass. Whilst I was making these cuts, I realised that the U was going to be more or less a dead loss. As I said earlier, the only way to expose it would have been to remove a lot of material, though I did have a plan to make the timber the main feature of the rim. The shape came together very quickly, and apart from one tiny void, the surface was blemish free. So after a few more passes with carbide and scrapers, it was done, though there would be some fine tuning towards the end. Now onto the rim. I was determined to have some of the U visible in the finished piece, and this was it, though at this point I was overlooking something which would crop up later on. The idea was to make the rim overhang as big as the material would allow, so taking the bowl gouge, I formed a cutout, stopping frequently to make sure I wasn't going too far. Cutout done, I tidied it up with a carbide and the skew, and that was it for now. Next I moved on to hollowing out. I knew the hollowing out was going to take a long time to do. It's one of the biggest voids I've formed in a solid blank, so to get a good start, I used a Forstner bit to drill down into the U. After drilling the centre down to around 100mm, I formed the rim. I did this mainly to see if it would hold together, and it would have to incorporate the natural shape of the U, and I wanted to see what that would look like. I sanded to 240 grit and it looked good, so on to the hollowing out. Using a handy feature on my lathe, I turned the headstock out to 45 degrees so I could get better access. Taking the 10mm medium hook tool, I started to remove the waste material. This began okay-ish. From time to time, I switched between different tools, trying to gauge which one was most efficient. This went on for over an hour. At one point, so I could get better access, I thought about cutting the blank in half along the resin witness line, but I couldn't work out a way to easily fix the top section to the chuck. So with only the back of my hand to look at, I'm going to skip to the next bit. I'm around halfway into the blank and it's tough going. I didn't get it on camera, but I bent my mid-sized carbide, and the best tool I have is at full stretch, and the aperture I have to work through is just too small. I carefully weighed up my options, and in the end, the rim had to go. With it out of the way, I could open up the top and get clear access to finish the inside. With the rim out of the way, I opened the top and drilled a bit further down into the blank. This was followed by another hour or so of hollowing out, but removing the rim offered up another opportunity, and more of that later. Once again, there isn't a lot to see, so I'm going to skip ahead. The opportunity I spoke about was to make a fitted lid, and this would need a recess to sit into. This was formed with a 1/4-inch parting tool, cutting down to around 6mm deep. The final once over with a small negative rate scraper, and it was done. I sanded all the way up to 3000 grit, Then I put it to one side and got on with making the lid. This piece of yew had some distinctive markings, and I hoped it would stand out in the finished piece. The first job was to get it to round. I did this with a gouge and parting tool. The diameter was roughly where I needed it to be, so I levelled the vase and cut away the edge so it was a snug fit in the vase recess. Snug fit achieved, I sanded to 400 grit and added a wax finish. I turned the lid around and shaped the top. The timber was quite thick, so this gave me some leeway in what I could do with it. A tall centre seemed to be the way to go, but as I got closer to the desired shape, the height needed to be reduced to keep it in proportion. A bit more work from the gouge and it was done. This was then sanded to 400 grit and I added a wax finish. Now sadly my camera started to play up, so I'm missing some of the footage. Just one more thing to make, the knob for the lid. I used African blackwood. With this fixed in the lathe, using the gouge, I roughly turned it to round and formed the locating pin. I thought something simple would be best, so using the detail spindle gouge, I formed a ball sat on a flat collar. I used the skew to finesse the shape, then I cut it free, refixed it in a small chuck, sanded it to 400 grit and added a coat of wax. Whilst working towards the finish, the camera shut down due to overheating. Camera problems sorted, I refixed the main piece on the lathe, cleaned down with denatured alcohol and applied 2 coats of sanding sealer, each one de-nibbed with a non-abrasive Scotch pad. Next up, Yorkshire grit, just a single application, thoroughly cleaned away until no more residue is picking up on the paper towel. Next, the resin polishing. First, Mirka Polar Shine 10, a single coat, cleaned away, ready for the next stage. Polar Shine 5, another single application, polished off to leave a deep shine. And to finish, Hampshire Sheen gloss finishing wax, 2 coats, buffed to seal and protect the surface. And that's it, another project finished. And this one was a bit of a journey, from using the wrong size casting bucket, which forced a design change, abandoning the live edge rim, and then the camera trouble. But I got there in the end, and I really like it, and hope you like it too. The swirling colours on either side of the witness line look great, all topped off with a U lid. Very cool. So with that said, I'd like to thank you all for watching. Please subscribe, it really helps the channel grow. A thumbs up will be much appreciated, and comments are always welcome. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.